wanted to show you a video by Eli Wolf. And Eli Wolf is a former player on the U.S. national Paralympic soccer team. And he's also in the sociology of sport. And he is a tireless worker trying to promote full inclusion in sport. And he focuses primarily on issues related to disability. And he had an opportunity to do a TED Talk. And I don't know if you are familiar with TED Talks, but very good educational source, an online source. And this particular TED Talk is on YouTube. And you can, well, we will give you the URL. I think that it might be difficult to understand all of the audio, but we have closed captions so that you can read. And Eli talks about the things that should happen in connection with sport and inclusion. And then after that, we can talk a little bit about that, and then we can talk a little bit about aging issues and sport, and then we'll move into commercialization and the economy and the media. So we will start with this.
I was able to take part in a program to learn about international treaty on the rights of persons with disabilities. I was amazed, I was overwhelmed, I was inspired. When I entered the building the very first time and I was told where to go, which room we were in for the meeting, they told me at the front, they said, this meeting is in the basement. You're proceeding to the basement. I was confused. I was caught off guard at the fact that they would have a disability rights meeting in the basement. It seemed quite contradictory from thinking about the ideas of disability rights. The idea of changing the paradigm from pity and charity to power and empowerment. The whole idea of the treaty was nothing about us without us. This is the idea. And so for me to come to this meeting and for it to be in the basement, I was quite concerned. So I came to my colleagues and I said, is this an important advocacy moment? Do we need to be calling up the troops to make sure that we're no longer in the basement? I asked around and finally I got the answer. And they said, actually, all meetings are in the basement. So you're okay. Nothing about us without us is happening there. To me, I would urge you all, and urge everyone you know, to think about the glasses that you wear. To think about every action. It's very powerful. It means a lot to me. It means how do we make this happen in every setting, in every moment, that people feel included and valued. Thank you so much.
So I hope you could understand some of the audio. The captions were not exact. There were problems with the captions, but they give you the general idea. And as you saw, Eli Wolf was a good part of the inspiration for me to include the chapter on age and ability. When I first met him, he said, "You're Coakley, okay. Where is the chapter on ability and disability in your book?" And every time I saw him, he kept reminding me that I was missing this chapter. So I talked with him. He helped me gather the literature, the research that I could use for that chapter. And now he is working worldwide to try to promote inclusion for people with disabilities. And he works with the United Nations. He works at a special center for the study of sport and society at Boston University in the United States, but he travels all over the world delivering this kind of message. So, and he delivers it very passionately because he can talk about feeling excluded and being invisible, and what it meant to him to participate in sport, because it was an important way for him to become visible and to develop his own positive sense of self and self-confidence. And when he was asked to give this talk, he said, "I don't know if I can do this with the television camera and I talk for 11 minutes without having any notes and anything." But he did a good job, very good job. So if you weren't able to understand it with these speakers, you can go to the YouTube video and take a look at it again if you want. And if you were talking with other people about disability, or if you're in a class where you're covering issues related to disability and sport, this is a good video to use if people can understand the English or read the captions. So, questions or observations about Eli's presentation? You know, his big issue now is we should not have a Paralympics. That there should be an Olympics, and it should include people with disabilities. So the events should be a part of the Olympics. They should not be 2 or 3 weeks later. They should be, you should have the 100 meters for the Olympic, for the able-bodied, and for the people without impairments, and then you should have the 100 meters for people with disabilities. Now that would be a major scheduling challenge, but he's using the Olympics as his ultimate goal. But he is looking for that type of inclusion in smaller events. so that you don't segregate people with disabilities. That when you have a sport event, you include them in the event, rather than having a separate event. Yes.
Os Jogos Paralímpicos, então, o esporte paralímpico seria um novo mito do esporte, então?
He's asking if the Paralympic Games could be the new sport myth.
The new sport myth?
Yeah, a new sport myth.
Mas mais daqueles mitos do esporte dos quais ele comentou.
One more sport myth as the other one that you say that so sport is good,
Right.
whatever.
Esse formato que o esporte paralímpico, né, os Jogos Paralímpicos tomaram hoje, se ele se configura como mais um desses mitos do esporte, né, na sociedade.
Isso quer dizer mito de inclusão?
Sim.
Yeah, he's asking if it's a kind of inclusion myth when you have the Paralympic Games the way we have.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I would call it an inclusion myth, but because when you talk about social change usually, almost all the time, occurs incrementally, step by step. And oftentimes it's little step by little step. And sometimes the first steps you take, you're not satisfied with that situation. But that first step helps you take the next step. And so the Paralympics were an important are an important first step because it provides an opportunity for people with disability to participate, and it provides an opportunity for everyone else to see them. And then maybe the next step, and this is, I've listened to Eli talk about this, the next step would be to take maybe 2 or 3 events from the Paralympics and move them into the Olympic calendar, the Olympic schedule for competitions. And then people would have an opportunity to see them when they watch the Olympics. And because many people don't have an opportunity to see the Paralympics. So that would be the next step. And then when people see, more people see the competitions for athletes with disabilities in the Olympics, then maybe they would develop a greater appreciation for those events, and then more events could be moved into the Olympics. So it would be a gradual process over time. So I don't think that Eli would say that the Paralympics are a myth, and I wouldn't either. I think that it is a first step in a long, long process of inclusion. Okay? And I think if you look about changes related to gender and race and ethnicity, and social class is a little different, but if you look at the changes, they have all occurred incrementally and step by step. The important thing is when you take a step, you don't let people push you back. Okay? When you take one step, you try to stay there and establish a firm basis for being there, and then you can take the next step. But people will resist along the way, certainly. The IOC is resisting Eli. Eli has gone to the IOC, and he suggested, let's have 1, 2, 3 events included in the main schedule. And they say no, but he keeps trying, and I think eventually he will be successful. I hope. So, and then that will be another step. So maybe in 30 years there will be no Paralympics. We will have one calendar for events. I think that would be difficult for scheduling, but maybe you could do it if you didn't just have one site for the Olympics. Maybe if you did that, you would have to have 2 hosts for the Olympics, so that you could schedule things in terms of the venues. And then the television would have to cover all of it. So, and I think in the future we will have more choices about what we watch in the Olympics too, because more than one channel will cover the Olympic Games. So, other questions on that? Did that answer? Is that okay? Answer?
I have one question. And was Elias or yours point of view on the Oscar Pistorius case of like competing within the Olympics?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
this is a step or this is a pushback or
Yeah.
backlash?
Yeah, Barbara's question is about Oscar Pistorius and his involvement in the Olympic 400 meters. And Eli would say this is another form of progress. But he also knows that when technology is being used like Oscar Pistorius is using it, that there's going to be much resistance. And you know, at first they wouldn't let Pistorius participate in the 400 meters in the Olympics because they thought he had an unfair advantage. So, and he had to show all sorts of data and research to show that when you wear the cheetah foot, it takes you longer, more time to develop your speed. If there's a little bit of wind, you know, it's very difficult to control your body when you're on those. If you've ever walked on stilts, do you understand that word? Yeah, on stilts. You know, this is difficult. I mean, it takes a long training in order to wear the cheetah feet and to run. So Pistorius was able to make the case that he should be included in the Olympics. But as the technology improves, there will be more and more resistance. And if you read the chapter on age and ability, the last section of the chapter is one of the ones that's interesting to me. It's talking about the transhumanists. And the transhumanists use the medical model of disability and of ability. And they basically say, all of us are less than perfect. So we can all benefit from fixes, from having our imperfections cured or fixed. So they would say that they would look at Barbara and say, well, she's okay, but she's not perfect. So maybe we could do this surgery, maybe we could add prosthetic legs, and then she would be able to run faster, or walk faster, or climb stairs better. So they promote the use of the medical model, not just for people with disability, but for everyone. And of course, there's much resistance to that. People say, then we will be moving into a world where people are half human and half machine. We will be cyborgs. But in many cases, we are already using a combination of technologies so that we can go about our daily lives. And many people, the U.S. is the best example of this. In the U.S., over half of all adults take some kind of drugs in order for them to continue doing what they do every day without certain kinds of inconveniences. So we are already using technology on a daily basis so that we can go about our lives more effectively. So what the transhumanists are saying is, this is okay to move in this direction, where we use more and more technology, whether it be changes in our body, changes in the kinds of drugs that we take, changes in how we interface with technology. So now, everybody is carrying around, we walk around Rio on Copacabana Beach, and all of this beautiful scenery, and people are walking, with their cell phones, doing messages. It's like the phone is attached to their body. It's like they're cyborgs already, because the phone is a permanent part of their body. They can't go anywhere without their phone. So we're moving in that direction.
Jay, in your book, in this chapter 10, you mentioned an example of a competition, I don't remember which one, where people with disabilities compete with people, normal people, but then they would have they would like start a little bit before the others, so that everybody is more or less equal in equal conditions. Is this common? Is this a trend that's starting to happen or not? This is an exception.
Yeah, it's an exception. I don't know if you remember that example, but what I was saying is that we can have more mixed competition. Not just people with disabilities and people without significant impairments, but men and women together, older people and younger people together, if we develop what I would call a handicapped system. Now, you have sports, I'm trying to think, I don't know enough about sports in Brazil, but do you have bowling in Brazil? Yeah, 10-pin bowling. And do you have bowling leagues where you compete? And in the United States, you tell me if you do this in Brazil. In the United States, you have to bowl like 10 games so that you have your average scores, and then you get a handicap so that when I compete against Barbara, maybe Barbara's better than me. So when we bowl, she has to, I get certain points automatically because my handicap is higher than her handicap. So we do the same thing in golf in the United States. If we're competing in golf and my handicap is 15 and another person's handicap is 10, then on the top 5 toughest golf holes, I get 1 stroke benefit on those 5 holes. And then that allows us to have a competition and be equal. Okay, so the first time I saw this in a unique way was in Scotland. I was in Scotland back in the mid-1980s, and I was working in England, and I went to the Highland Games. And I don't know if you've ever heard. The Highland Games are people's sports that people in Scotland have developed for many, many years, where they have community festivals, and they set up running races and bicycle races, and they have folk dancing competitions, and they carry the caber toss, the big like telephone pole, and they have the traditional Scottish folk sports. Okay, and I went to the Highland Games, and I was watching the 100 meters, and the 100 meters had a 22-year-old woman, an 18-year-old man who was the high school national champion, a 30-year-old man who had been a former Olympic sprinter, a 65-year-old man who had been a sprinter when he, in Scotland when he was younger, now he was 65, and another woman who was about 28 years old. And the starting points for each of these people was different in the 100 meters. So, so the starting point, here is the 0 meter, and For the 65-year-old, he was starting here. And for the 25-year-old woman, she was starting here. And the high school champion was starting here. And the former Olympian was starting here. And the other woman was starting here. So they had different starting points. And when the gun went off, they ran. And it was amazing because they all crossed the finish line within 1.5 meters of each other. So for them to participate, they had to run in certain 100-meter races and get their times, and then they have a formula that they use to determine what kind of a starting advantage they get in a race. And so the first heat, there were many heats, but the final heat involved these people. And the 65-year-old man won the race. And I have a photo of them walking back from the finish line to the starting line, and the 65-year-old has his arm around the 18-year-old high school champion, and he's telling him about how to improve his running. And I thought, this is a good idea, because we can include the whole community. Why do we have to have age segregation and gender segregation when we can, in some sports, not in all, but in some sports, we can develop this kind of a system to bring people together. And then we learn from each other, and we learn more about the abilities of people who are different than we are. So I thought, when I saw that would be, I didn't think of it then, but I thought of this later. That would be a way to include people with disabilities into the regular community sport events that occur. And I don't think this can happen in every sport, but I think that it can happen in certain sports. So we have to think more creatively about how to organize sports if we want full inclusion. And Eli would agree with that for sure, because he has already tried to develop some models for that to occur. And I know Rafael, he's not here today, but he works with wheelchair rugby, and he has played wheelchair rugby. So with the athletes with disabilities. So you can do that and create mixed sports. So that's just one possible model. So yeah, that's a good idea, and I really like it for aging, related to aging, because it's a way for older people and younger people to compete together, and we already have that in our 10K races and 5K races, where everybody runs together, but you're in different age categories, and then they have first place, second place, third place in each age category. So we already are doing that in certain people's sports. So we could take that model and we could put it in more competitive kinds of events that are more Prolympic-like. So this, just to continue our discussion a little bit about ableism and ageism. We didn't talk about ageism yesterday, but ageism is an evaluative perspective that usually values one particular age group over other age groups within the society. And it justifies discrimination against particular age groups that are assumed to be incapable of full participation in mainstream activities. And what that means is that in societies, in industrial and in post-industrial societies, as people get older, they are oftentimes seen as becoming increasingly irrelevant. They can no longer contribute to society because in industrial societies, they can't perform the same kind of labor as younger people, so they're defined as less useful in the society. And in a post-industrial society, they are seen as having knowledge that no longer is applicable to a rapidly changing world in which technology is being used. So, many young people think, this older person, they don't know about technology, they couldn't do this particular kind of a job, they wouldn't be able to develop software, they wouldn't be able to work in our work group because they have old knowledge. It's knowledge that was useful in a previous time, but it's no longer useful now. So in post-industrial societies, older people are defined as less and less relevant. So, but older people in many of those societies are resisting that kind of a self-definition. And ideas and beliefs about age and aging are changing. But ageism continues to be used to age segregate almost every form of sport participation. And when you stop and think about it, sport is one of the only contexts in the world where we accept, without any question, segregation by age and segregation by gender. In most other spheres, segregation by gender would be illegal or it would be discouraged. And, if a company said, we are only hiring people between the ages of 25 and 35, I think in many societies, people would accuse them of discrimination, of age discrimination. And but ideas are now changing about aging and the abilities of older people. And now you have older people playing sports that in the past, they never played. My father, when he was 40 years old, he said he had to stop doing active things because active things were bad for the heart of an older person. That was the popular knowledge about the human body at that time. As people got older, they said we have to slow down because we don't want to put a strain on our heart. So older people stopped doing sports. They stopped doing physical activities. But now we have more medical awareness about how the heart works, how the body works, and older people are saying you don't have to stop. You can continue. In fact, it's very important to continue to move. So today we have many more examples of older people playing sports. And my daughter just went to a national soccer tournament in Las Vegas, and she was playing in the under 50. It was actually over 45. And over 45. But she brought home photographs of the women's football team, the soccer team, for under 60s, under 70s, under 80s, and under 90s. So there was a tournament for teams of women all in their 80s, and the photographs are great. These women, they look healthy. They're smiling. They're active. Of course, they're not running as fast as they used to, but they're in Las Vegas. They're participating in a national tournament, and this would have been unheard of just 40 years ago. So that change has occurred very rapidly, and it's partly due to what we call in demography the baby boom generation. And the baby boom generation is the large age cohorts that were born after the Second World War. Because prior to the Second World War and during the Second World War, people were not having, in most countries, people were not having babies. But then after the war was over and people's expectations for the future became more hopeful and more positive, people had many children between 1946 and 1964. That's what the demographers say is the formal baby boom generation. And the age cohort, that age cohort, was bigger than any age cohort in human history. So they have political power because they have more people. And you know, when that cohort was small, popular culture became more accepted, rock and roll music, you know, sex, drugs, rock and roll. I mean, all of that was the baby boom generation. And as the baby boom generation has gotten older, and now they're in their 60s, the oldest ones are in their 60s. Actually, the oldest one now is 69 years old. So they are changing the way we think about age. And that's happening in some societies more explicitly than in other societies. So, and I'm not familiar with demography in Brazil, but I think that in Brazil there is a baby boom generation. So, so age is a social construction. And, you know, being 71 years old is real, okay? I'm 71 years old, that's real. But the meaning that I give to being 71 and that other people give to being 71, that is a social construction. And that occurs in different societies. So, so people have said to me in some cases, you know, you don't look like you're 71. And my response to them is, well, this is how Jay Coakley looks when he's 71, and more people are not looking to be as old as they are, because we have this old idea about what being old looks like. And now those ideas are starting to change. So that someone will, you know, there will be someone who looks like me in 20 years, who's 71 years old, and they might, and they will say, oh, he looks like a 71-year-old. Because we will be changing our expectations and our ideas about what 71 is supposed to look like. So when you're 71, the ideas will be different than they are today. So in the United States, we say that 60 is today's 40 in the United States. You know, because when my father was 40 years old, he thought his life was over. You know, he couldn't get a job, he couldn't start in a new career. And now, I know 60-year-olds who are going to get their PhDs. You know, that's a very different way to think about age. And ideas and beliefs about age and meritocracy are linked with health and ability. The important thing is not so much how old you are anymore, it's how healthy you are. And what kinds of abilities you have. When a person is physically active and cognitively capable, he or she is considered to be young. And I don't know if this happens in Brazil, but if you have a grandparent who's, say, 65 years old, and the grandchild who's 10 says to his grandfather, let's go play football, and the 65-year-old says, you know, I'm too old to do that. You know, then that's part of how age is being constructed in that society and how that individual might be internalizing those ideas. But if the 65-year-old goes out and plays football with his 10-year-old grandson and some of the grandson's friends, the grandson's friends would say, "Oh, your grandfather is young," because he's physically active. So we equate being physically active with being young. And when someone is doing many sports and they're 65 years old, people now say, "Oh, you know, they're really young." But that's part of the old age construction. You know, in 20 years we won't say that. In 20 years we see an active 65-year-old, we'll say, "That's an active 65-year-old. We won't say it's young, because we won't be equating youth with physical activity, which we do now. So older people today are expected to be more active than in the past. But those changes are uneven. So some older people don't want to be active. You know, they say, "Hey, I've lived a long life, now it's my time to rest." But that will start to change too. So we have examples now that are getting media coverage, like this 101-year-old who did a marathon. And he's from India, and he probably has some kind of special physical abilities. You know, in the United States, more and more people over the age of 70 years old are doing marathons. So the cultural barriers to physical activity among older people are disappearing. And as people live longer, ideas and cultural expectations about age and aging are changing. And older people in meritocracies, where your status depends on your ability to contribute to society, older people in the past have been marginalized on the assumption that they no longer contribute in terms of labor and creating new knowledge. But many ideas related to that are changing. So now there are people in their 70s who are doing more creative things than they ever did in their lives. And companies like Google and some of the big technology companies, they have been hiring younger people because they feel that younger people are the ones who can think about the future and think about innovations and so on. But Google is starting to realize that older people may have something to contribute to this process of innovation and creativity. And they're doing some experiments where they're hiring older people and they're putting them in work groups with younger people. So, and that reminds me of the photo of the older sprinter with the younger sprinter talking about strategy. And because that older sprinter had something that maybe was valuable for that younger sprinter to learn, to improve his running abilities. So people are starting to change their ideas about what older people can contribute, not just in sport, but in other activities as well. Now, people who have internalized ageist attitudes may create a self-fulfilling prophecy by withdrawing from active participation in society. Have you heard the word self? Do you have that in a translation in Portuguese, self-fulfilling prophecy? If you believe something to be true, then it will be true for you. Okay, so if you believe that that it's not good for older people to be active, then you will not be active. So that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And there are still older people who have internalized ageist attitudes, and because of that, they've withdrawn from active participation in society. And, and beliefs about age and physical activity and health also influence our official policies about services and medical care. And those are big issues. We won't talk about them, but one example is in the United States, we have, when you get to be 65 years old, you are covered by a national health policy called Medicare. And when you're 67 years old, you receive your Social Security benefits. It's like a pension. But that age was determined back in the 1930s when people were only living to be 63 years old. You know, that was the life expectancy. Now the life expectancy is 80 years old. And our Social Security system is running out of money because people are living too long. So the big political issue is maybe we should not be giving Social Security to people until they're 70 or 72, because we have to make adjustments because our lives are changing. But older people are resisting that because they say, I don't want to work anymore. Well, of course, you know, Dora doesn't want to work. Margaret doesn't want to. You know, I mean, if we could get a pension, we'd all quit working at 35. But so we have to change our attitudes about when is the appropriate age for retirement.
We're going through the same thing in Brazil.
Yeah.
A big discussion right now.
Okay. So aging and sport participation, obviously our ideas are changing, and participation in sports becoming more open for older people, and this is an important one. If you watched the football game last night, you saw the goalkeeper for Sao Paulo is 41 years old. Now that is something that you wouldn't have seen in the past, because now athletes are playing to an older age than in the past. And that's partly related to our changing ideas about sport training, about sport medicine, about sport nutrition, and so on, because now athletes don't expect to stop at 27 years old. They expect to continue into their 30s, when 25 years ago, you know, people were stopping before they got to be 30 years old. Now they're continuing on into their 30s. So, and that's starting to change ideas about what 30-year-olds should be doing, because we look at a 41-year-old goalkeeper and we think, you know, I should be being more active. I'm 40 years old, so why am I not more active? So, so the elite athletes are providing models for us and helping us change our ideas about age and sport participation. So, so the expectations about playing sports at older ages are changing. And this, some people asked me about this photo, but this is the three generations of the Coakley family. So, this is my daughter, Danielle. So here she's 46, and Maddie was 17 here, and Allie, this is the Allie I've talked about, who has, I shouldn't say, if she heard me say this, she would give me a hard time. She has cerebral palsy. She doesn't like that to be the way she is described, okay? But she and I run in the races, as I said. So, so we all run 5K races together, and so to have 3 generations running in one race, that's pretty new, but it's not uncommon in the United States. There's other families like this. So. And research on older people in sports indicates that the master's events are becoming increasingly popular. And as people in their late 30s, 40s, and 50s want to continue not just playing sports, but competing in sports at a relatively high level. And the World Masters Games are organized to be inclusive with a focus on health advantages, the health advantages of lifelong sport participation. So the Masters events are kind of Prolympic, but they also have some qualities of people's sports as well. And sport participation helps people negotiate the process of aging. And you know, this is one thing that I found in my life, is that as I participate in sport, I'm learning about my body and changes that are occurring in my body as I get older. And as I deal with those things, as I participate in sport, it's helping me accept who I am today. And not in terms of a self-fulfilling prophecy that I'm, you know, should become less active or anything like that. But it's helping me accept the changes that are occurring in my body. I still feel good about my body when I run a 5K race, even though my time is much slower than it would have been 10 years ago. But when I get done with that race, I say, thank you, body. You know, you just have carried me for 5 kilometers running, and I appreciate that. Thank you. So it helps me understand a little bit about aging and what it means in my life. So older people are often attracted to events offering competition without the pressure to constantly improve. Okay? You know, I am no longer trying to set my record, you know, my best record. I'm not looking for a personal best. You know, I'm looking to finish the race and feel good. Okay? And if I win something in my age group, nice, but it's irrelevant. You know? Now, some people take the races a little bit more seriously for competition purposes, but I know that I'm not going to be improving in most of the sports that I would do. You know, maybe something I've never done before. Maybe I could start to develop some more skills now, but all of the sports that I've participated in the past, I'm not as good as I was. So the reason that I play sports is to be with friends, to feel good about my body, to interact with people. So I don't feel pressure to constantly improve my performance. Now, if you're a 45-year-old in a master's event, maybe you are seeking your personal best. But there's not as much pressure as there was when you were 20. And here's the image that I use. The old images from the Highland Games, and my camera was not very good, so I can't use those. But this is an example that I use to talk about the age-integrated participation with the handicaps. All right. Now, one of the final points here on age is that age intersects with gender and with ethnicity and social class, because the meanings that are given to age are different for men and women, and they're different for people from different ethnic groups, and they're also different for people from different social classes. Because people from working class backgrounds, they feel older at a younger age than someone like me who does academic work. You know, my academic work does not take a toll on my body. But if I'm digging ditches or working in physical labor, then when you're 50 years old, you say, you know, you feel old. You can't do the same work that you did when you were 25. So, but I can do the same work now at my age that I was doing at 25 years old. In fact, I'm better at it now than I was at 25. So, but that's a social class related phenomenon. And people in upper classes, they don't get as old as quickly. And you know, their money helps to keep them younger because it gives them access to different kinds of activities so they can stay healthy. You know, people can hire personal trainers, they can get memberships at the gymnasium, at the fitness center, and they can take advantage of sport participation opportunities. So, and people also say that women say this, some women, they say, you know, women get older faster than men. And why is that? What is the way we have constructed gender? You know, if you emphasize physical attractiveness in the eyes of men as being a criteria for the value of a woman, then as that woman gets older and men no longer define her as attractive, then she feels older, if that's the way she defines gender. If you don't define femininity in connection with female attractiveness, then as you get older, you can feel younger, you know, to use that terminology. So, so many people say that men don't age as rapidly as women, but that's related to the way we've constructed gender. And in some ethnic groups, especially ethnic groups that have roots in traditional societies, older people are defined very differently. And in some cases, if they come from very traditional societies, older people are defined as sources of wisdom. Because in traditional societies, change does not occur very rapidly. So older people have more experience, so they're automatically defined as more wise. So, you know, so there's some differences between ethnic groups when it comes to the social construction of age. And now today we see media images of active older people. But if you look at the ads in magazines and on television that have older people in them, they're always upper middle class, at least in the United States. They're upper middle class people who are doing active, they're taking a cruise, you know, they're on holiday on a beach somewhere, you know, they're jogging, you know, along a beautiful running trail. And so for older people that have fewer resources, cost and accessibility barriers may interfere with engaging in regular physical activities and sport. So social class is important when we talk about this. So that's, I think unless you have questions, we can say goodbye to age temporarily. And maybe, yeah, why don't we take a 15-minute break now, and then we can come back and start talking about the economy of commercialization. So we'll take because we're going to stop a little bit earlier today because I have a dissertation proposal committee that I have to do in West Virginia on Skype or Hangouts or something. So we'll take a break. Talk about sport and the economy, which is a big topic. But so we will focus on just one part of that topic, and that is what happens to sport when it becomes commercialized. And when I say commercialized, I'm talking about sport that is being done to make money for people, not just to survive as a sport. You know, when you have a team and you try to raise some money for your team, maybe get a little sponsor, that's not commercial sport, okay? That's still people's sport and you need some resources, but you're not trying to make a profit. But when I talk about commercialized sport, I'm talking about sport that goes beyond that and is is being done for the purpose of making profits for individuals or for corporate or for for groups. Okay, and I want to call your attention to a couple of readings that are in the Dropbox. And by the way, I have the slides for today and for yesterday in Dropbox. But this is one that's will be very useful for people in Brazil because it's the World Stadium Index, and it's a wonderful study of all of the big facilities that have been built for mega events, and whether those facilities are actually providing a benefit in that society or are a problem. So, and then Gyöngy Foldeschi from Hungary, I think she's like the mother of the sociology of sport in the world. She's a very bright woman, and I had an opportunity just a few months ago to sit down and have long conversations with Gyöngy, and she's a very wonderful person to talk to. She has a very good, broad view of what's going on in the world. And she wrote this article, The Impact of the Global Economic Crisis on Sport. She wrote the article a couple of years ago, and she was talking about what has happened in many societies between 2008 and 2012, related to the global economic recession and its impact on sport. And her major conclusion is that this global economic crisis had a major impact on all of sport, but it had the biggest impact on people's sports and on grassroots sports because people had fewer resources to use to participate and to maintain their sport participation. But at the top level, like at the Olympics, World Cup, top professional level, the economic crisis did not have as big an impact because many people felt desperate. Many officials felt desperate during the economic crisis, and they thought if they invested money in big-time sport, in big commercial sport and commercial sport facilities, that would help improve the economy. So actually, the economic crisis in some societies actually led more money to be spent on the top Prolympic level sports. And so it's an interesting analysis that she gives in that paper. And this is a photo taken by this woman I know, Barbara Schallsbeck, and when she was in London, and I used it because this is what London 2012 was about. It was about the economy, it was about commercialization, and it was about consumption. So the spectators were all seen by the IOC, by London 212, the committee, as consumers, not spectators. So they create the London 2012 megastore, and by the megastore there's the giant McDonald's and the giant Coca-Cola signs, and it was all about the commerce, the profits that were being made in connection with the Olympics. And professional sports, professional commercial sports, seldom exist in societies where the per capita or the GDP is low, where societies are poor, and where people are working long hours in order to survive. So it's hard to have professional sport in that kind of a situation because people can't train to develop skills to get up to a professional level, and people don't have time to go to matches and to pay money to go see sport. So professional sport only exists in certain kinds of wealthy societies where there is enough resources and enough free time and good transportation so that people can attend sporting events and pay money to go. So, so in Afghanistan, these people are playing the most popular sport in Afghanistan, Bushkahi, and but they're not being paid. You know, they're playing because this is part of their culture, but they're not. You can't have full-time athletes, and you can't have fans that pay money because in Afghanistan, the resources are scarce. So why are commercial sports so popular today? You know, and that's a question that we can answer in many different ways. And I think, you know, figurational theory and Norbert Elias, you know, has one set of answers. Pierre Bourdieu has some other answers, and I've tried to summarize all of the answers that people have given for this, and to say that commercial sports are popular today because there is a general quest for excitement. That's the terminology used in figurational sociology. You know, as our society becomes more scheduled, regularized, patterned, predictable, where there's an emphasis on all of those things, excitement disappears. And so people are interested after working in a job that's the same kind of job day after day, with little change. They would like to go to the Americana and watch an exciting football match. So, commercial sports today also are compatible with many social class ideologies that exist in societies, in neoliberal societies around the world, where there's an emphasis on meritocracy, on getting ahead, on individual mobility, on being able to compete in the job market and become a winner and make more money and become more successful. That fits with the whole idea of commercial sport, where they emphasize competition and becoming successful and moving on to the next level and winning this tournament. So that kind of commercial sport is represented in neoliberal societies in a way that reproduces social class ideology. So, and commercial sports are also popular because many wealthier societies have opportunities to provide youth sports, organized youth sports, where young people can play sports on a regular basis, not just informal sports, but also play the more official organized sports. And because when they do that, they're more likely to develop a long-term interest in sport as a part of their lives. So they're more likely to pay money to go watch sport in the future, or pay money for to watch a cable, you know, on a pay-per-view or cable channel that you pay for. And also, this is important, the people who are in charge of commercial sports are becoming very, very good at marketing their sports. And they're all, the television companies and the media companies are becoming much more sophisticated at representing sports in the media. So if you just remember in your own lives, some of the media technology that was used for football matches, I think today they're using more cameras. The cameras are better. We have high definition now. We have information, graphics that are being superimposed on the screen so that we can understand things better. And there's more advertisements for sport. you know, it's being marketed very effectively. And that marketing differs in one society to another, and it differs from one sport to another. Usually the main sport, like maybe football in Brazil, is being associated with national identity. It's being associated with patriotism, maybe nationalism. And in the United States, U.S. football is being associated with the military. They always have the flag out. They always have military people doing the pregame rituals. And they always pay homage to soldiers and the military. So they tie football and the military together. And they've done this as a form of marketing. And it's been very effective for the NFL. And I don't know about the marketing studies in Brazil, but I would assume that there's new and creative ways to market football and volleyball and basketball, other sports in Brazil. So, you know, this is part of the spectacle, the marketing spectacle in the United States. This is the Denver Broncos. It's one of the only games that I've gone to in a number of years, but here you can see this is pregame. So it's the Marines, but they also had Army, Navy, and Coast Guard, and representatives from other military, and they gave free tickets to soldiers, and they made a big deal out of this. You know, they said we give free tickets to soldiers because we're for the United States. The NFL and the United States are one. So they use all of this for their marketing, and while they do that, they fly the flag, and they also put Bud Light. So, you know, Bud Light likes this because then Bud Light gets associated with the U.S., with the military, with patriotism, with national identity. If you're a real American, you drink Bud Light, and you fly on United. So that's one of the reasons why commercial sports is successful. It has attracted corporate support because the corporations can turn spectators into consumers. That's part of the process of commercialization. Okay, so the economic motives for commercial sports are now global, and because sport organizations, and I'm using U.S. example, well, not all. FIFA and the NFL, the NBA, they all seek global exposure and expansion. You know, they're all about increasing their markets. That's the goal of commercial sport. And if you have saturated the market in your host country, then you try to expand your markets into other countries. So the NFL plays, I think, 2 games a year now in other countries. So they play in England because they want to try to generate more European fans, spectators for the NFL. They've played in Japan, and I think next year they're going to play 1 game in China. So, you know, 1.4 billion potential spectators, consumers and you know, that's a market that FIFA's looking at. It's the market, obviously, that the IOC wants. They choose Beijing as the host for the 2008 games because of 1.4 billion consumers, potential consumers for the IOC. So corporations want to use sport to promote global expansion as well, to increase their profits, and they want everyone in the world to know that they are the source of pleasure and excitement in your life. And that way, there will be fewer objections to their global expansion into other societies, even though they might be a US-based company. And this other country doesn't like the US. So what will a US-based company do in order to get into that country? They use sport as their shield. You know, they use sport to introduce themselves to that country. And they try to separate themselves from the US and connect themselves with FIFA or with the Olympics. And that then makes it easier for them to do business in that country. So, these corporations are looking for ideological outposts in the minds of people all over the world, so that there will be no resistance to their capitalist expansion. And we see that, obviously, this is not in big news, but you know, on the buses in London, they were Coca-Cola buses, basically. Not all of the buses, but a number of the buses, and because Coca-Cola has been supporting Olympic dreams since 1928. And you know, when the Olympics were in Atlanta, which is the headquarters for Coca-Cola in the world, for Coca-Cola International, many people called those Olympics the Coca-Cola-Olympics. So, because it was Coca-Cola that went to the IOC and said, you better take this bid from Atlanta, because if you don't, maybe we will not give another $1 billion to the IOC over the next 4 years. And so the IOC said, okay, Atlanta looks good, okay? So I think we'll go there. So, and that was part of Coca-Cola's strategy for global expansion. And it's been very successful for Coca-Cola over the past almost century. And this, some of that material in that chapter is too much focused on the U.S., but in the United States, I think we are number one in the world when it comes to marketing and when it comes to branding. And you know, now the word brand is a very popular word in English, and every company is interested in branding. Even individual athletes see themselves now as a potential brand. So when you sign your professional contract in soccer, for example, your agent will sit down with you and say, your goal is to become a global brand. We want the whole world to know about the Niemeyer brand, the Messi brand. And because then you can get endorsements from companies all over the world and make more money. And me, as an agent, I get a percent of all of that. So, so these agents want to turn athletes into brands, commercial brands. And so sport places are branded, sport events are branded, athletes are branded. And this type of branding is just accepted as normal in the United States. You know, 50 years ago in the United States, that was not the case. Branding didn't even exist. So in the past half century, we have moved from no branding at all to every possible type of branding that you could conceive of now exists. And for example, when I went to Americana on Saturday night, I was very surprised, because we walked into the stadium and there were all these walls like this, empty. And we could have Coca-Cola, Adidas, Nike, you know, we could have big logos all over there with happy people, having fun, you know, drinking, wearing Adidas, wearing whatever. And the Americana did not have that. But in the United States, any stadium, any professional stadium that you go in, there would not be a space bigger than this that does not have branding on it. And also, when in the Americana, we walked in and there was one little area, maybe as big as this area right here, where they were selling shirts for the two teams. And in the United States, if you were in a stadium like the Americana, it would be a shopping center, all right? there would be, and this is no exaggeration, there would be at least 20 restaurants. There would be at least 50 places where you can buy souvenirs related to sport. There would be at least 20 places where you could pay money for other things, like get a picture taken, you know, next to an image of one of the athletes, or other things. The capitalists are very creative. So, in terms of getting money, so there would be at least in the new stadiums now at least 120 commercial shops, you know, sites within the stadium. And in America now, I see this one little area with, you know, a few shirts hanging up. You know, that's very different than you would find in the U.S. So I predict that as the search for profits becomes greater and greater in Brazil, that we will see more and more branding. That's what modern football is all about. So, and this is a quote from the official program of the Olympics. And it says in the program, without sponsors, there would be no Olympic Games. Without the Olympic Games, there would be no dreams. Without dreams, there would be nothing. So if you have taken a course on logic, you know that we can change this. Without McDonald's, there would be no Olympic Games. Without Olympic Games, there would be no dreams. Without dreams, there would be nothing. Therefore, without McDonald's, there would be nothing. And this is, the IOC feels responsible to make sure they promote the interests of their sponsors. And commercialization is most prevalent. Commercialized sports are most prevalent in neoliberal societies. And you know, the United States is probably the most neoliberal of all societies, but many South American and Latin American societies are increasingly becoming neoliberalized. In fact, that has been the source of murder, torture, and revolution in South America, in Chile, in Argentina, and in other countries. So, and in Brazil, over the years. If you read Eduardo Galeano's book, The Open Veins of Latin America, then you understand that this whole push towards neoliberalization has led to horrific kinds of consequences in many Latin American countries. And the US has been part of the forces pushing for that, but not just the US, also some Western Europe and Northern European countries as well. So neoliberalism is an ideology that has powerful and pervasive significance, and it's the principle on which economic development, as defined by many people today, is based. Economic development is being defined in neoliberal terms. And with the Olympics in 2016 in Rio, you will see that. Multinational corporations will be the major sponsors. They will be using their sponsorship in order to get a foothold in Brazil and in terms of making economic investments, in terms of owning assets in Brazil. It is the foundation for unquestioned political policies that are difficult to change. Privatization, deregulation will continue to happen in Brazil. And one of the things that the Olympics will do is open up the door for more privatization and more deregulation. That's Coakley's prediction. Okay, I don't know for sure if it will happen, but I think that's what's happened in other societies where there have been hosts to major mega events. It's opened up the door for more emphasis on a neoliberal ideological approach to the economy, to the political world and government, to cultural values, and to the way a social structure and social relationships are constructed. So basically, neoliberalism gets deeply woven into the structures of every major institution and organization. And I think that we had a discussion about this the other day, but I think MMA is a good example of this. MMA focuses on individuals and individualism, which is a key component of neoliberalism, and it focuses on spectacle. It focuses on the athletes being self-made. These are not people who grew up with advantages and coaches and all of those things. These are self-made, tough individuals, and we have very few rules. We don't like regulations in neoliberal society because that stops corporations from doing what they want. So MMA is a nice way to bring a neoliberal cultural orientation into a society. Now, Joe McGuire would say, Coakley, you are wrong, that when MMA comes to Brazil, Brazil will define and give meaning to MMA in a way that fits with their culture. So we will have globalization, not globalization, not Americanization. We'll have globalization. But I argue with Joe and say, I agree to an extent, but if you look over time, in most cases, not all, what happens is that when a sport like MMA comes into a culture, over time, it is bringing with it certain kinds of values that may not have been popular in that culture before. And they will become a little bit more popular. Maybe not take over, but become a little bit more popular. So MMA, by the way, is also the most rapidly growing media television sport in the United States. And it fits with neoliberal ideology very closely, especially for working class people. You know, neoliberal ideology is actually something that is in conflict with the interests of most working class people. So how do you get working class people to agree that there should be no government regulations that would help them get minimum wage higher, help them form unions, help them improve their own lives? How do you get people to buy a neoliberal ideology that favors the interests of the corporation that wants to pay people less and less and less? Well, you do it by presenting a sport like MMA that working class people love to watch, but it comes with these values, which leads them to be more likely to accept neoliberal changes in the society. Now that is a little bit of a controversial statement, and it's one that we debate about in the sociology of sport. Okay? But this is my particular position, but I want you to know that not everyone agrees with me. Okay? So the important thing, I think, when we talk about commercialization in sport is what happens, when a sport becomes commercialized. And I looked at many, many studies about what is happening to sport over the past half century. And the best that I can determine is that when sports become commercialized, there are changes in the structure and goals in that sport. The orientations of athletes, coaches, and sponsors begin to change. And the people and organizations that control sports begin to change. So we can look at each of those factors quickly, but commercial sports involve a shift from aesthetic orientations to heroic orientations. This is related to number 2. Okay. Are there good translations for that? So the aesthetic orientations, there's an emphasis on the beauty and pleasure of movement. On ability and the mastery of technical skills and a willingness to explore limits and a commitment to being active and involved as a participant in the sport, for the team, for the club. And when you go read statements from Socrates, the soccer club, Socrates or Romario, this is what they're talking about. They're saying that when they played, this was the emphasis. There was an emphasis on the beauty, on the rhythm, on the aesthetic aspects of football. With commercialization over time, what has happened is that this has not disappeared. It's still there. But this has become increasingly important. And this has become a little bit less important. So now there's more of an emphasis on danger and excitement, possible injury, and the risks that people are willing to take, on the style, the personas that are being developed by athletes, with everything from the way they dress to how they cut their hair to how they respond to the audience and in different ways so that they can create a persona so that it will attract more spectators, especially spectators who don't have a deep knowledge of the sport. Now this maybe is difficult to talk about in Brazil with football, but because I think in Brazil everybody claims to be an expert in football in Brazil. But if you want to be successful as a commercial sport, football in Brazil has to appeal to people who are not all experts. You know, the people who grew up playing football, who understand all of the subtle strategies that exist. They're going to go watch football no matter what. But if you want to make money, you've got to get people in the stadium and watching on television who don't have that deep understanding. You've got to attract a mass audience, not just a smaller, knowledgeable audience. So how do you attract the mass audience? Well, you don't do it by emphasizing aesthetic orientations. You do it by emphasizing the heroic orientations. And so now we have programs in the morning that give you just the highlights. And what are the highlights? They're the goals. And someone who really understands football knows that the goal is just the end of a complex strategy that maybe has been happening for the last 10 minutes or maybe the entire game. And that if you don't understand that strategy in terms of how they've been moving the ball in this direction, and I'm not an expert in soccer, but in football, but for the people who are, they know that the goal is just it's important, obviously, but that's not what gets them to the match. What gets them to the match is to watch the strategy as it unfolds over time. But for the people who don't understand all of that, the goal is the important thing. Okay? Because that's the thing that matters, whether you win or whether you lose. It's not how you play the game. It's who scores the goals. So there's a more of an emphasis on who scores, and the situation, and just the images related to sport. So basically, commercial sports are entertainment, and it depends on attracting a mass audience. And a mass audience, many of the members lack technical knowledge about the game, about the sport. And entertaining people without technical knowledge requires an emphasis on heroic action. So now, people in sport, people who are in sport management, they understand that they better be careful, because if you eliminate the aesthetic orientations, then you eliminate the foundation for your most dependable spectators. So if you have only spectacle, only hero, then you end up with lucha libre maybe, or professional wrestling in the United States, WWE. And those are sports that are the extreme case of commercialization. So going back to number one, structure and goals. Oftentimes, if you want to make a game commercially attractive, it's not only orientations that change, but also the actual rules may change. So in tennis, if you want to televise tennis, you can't have, what do you call it when it's a tie match and they play the extra points in tennis? I'm spacing. Yeah, right. So in the past, you didn't have tiebreakers. You could play for 10 hours. Well, if you want to make money and sell your event to the media companies, they can't televise for 10 hours. They have to fit into a programming time period. So what did tennis do? They developed the tiebreaker. And in golf, I know golf is not popular in Brazil, but in Brazil, in golf, they used to play one player against another player in a match, or in a medal. They called it a medal competition. And when one player won, they went to the next round. But if Tiger Woods is playing and he loses in that first medal contest, they lose all their spectators. So what they did is they said, let's change the way we do tennis tournaments, golf tournaments, and we'll have it be over 3 days. And so that Tiger Woods does not get eliminated on day one. And hopefully, people will continue to watch all 3 days. And so they changed the rules of golf. And the NBA put in the 24-second clock. You can think of all of your examples of the rule changes that have occurred to make sports more media-friendly and spectator-friendly. So some of the rules will speed up the action and emphasize heroic orientations, increase the scoring and the scoring chances. In football, didn't always have shootouts, right? At the end, but when there has to be a winner and a loser, because people want a winner and a loser in commercial sports, then we add shootouts. So you can't have a draw, basically. Also, you try to balance competition. And this is a challenge in the top leagues, in the Premier League or the Level 1 leagues. Like in Spain, now, Real Madrid and Barcelona are so much better than all of the other Spanish teams that many people say, we don't want to go to those other matches. We only want to see Real Madrid play Barcelona. Well, that's a problem for the Spanish league. And they are thinking about trying to develop some kinds of rules that limit what Real Madrid and Barcelona can spend on athletes so that other teams have an opportunity to buy good athletes. So that there will be more parity, more equality in the competition. Because people don't want to see a 9-0 football match. You know, they want to see 3-2. So, somehow that 9-0 is in my head. So the rules will increase the dramatic moments. So last night, when there was the shootout with Sao Paulo and the Rio team, Cruzeiro, so Donnelly is a Sao Paulo fan, so we had to stop dinner for a while, we had to go over and watch, because this was a dramatic moment. And I don't know anything about these two teams. I know little about soccer, you know, some, but this was exciting for me too. I'm part of that mass audience. You know, this dramatic moment was good even for Coakley, you know, in Brazil. And then now the marketing promotes attachment to players and teams. So you can buy shirts, coffee cups, bumper stickers, and things, all sorts of things. And this happens in the US more than in other countries, but now we have television timeouts in our sports. So in hockey and in basketball, ice hockey and basketball, the coaches know when there will be commercial breaks, the TV timeouts, and they develop their strategies. They will say, I won't call a timeout now, because if we just wait a minute, there'll be a television timeout. And then I'll be able to talk to the players and so on. So, you know, this is changing the dynamics of the game. And one of the reasons why soccer is not popular as it could be in the US is they had continuously running clock for 45 minutes. The media companies don't like that because they can't sell 15 commercials that would happen in the first half of an NFL game, 15, 40 commercials, because there's no commercial break. So that's why we don't have more, we only have soccer on the cable channels where they don't have commercial breaks, okay, where people are paying for the channel. So, so those are all part of commercialization. And the goal is to provide a total, who did that? A total entertainment. Oh, I'm trying to give you a total entertainment experience, and it's not successful. But, you know, one of the things you notice if you go to an NBA game in the United States, and my friends from other countries, they all notice this. We go to a game and they say, there was not 2 seconds, not 2 seconds, for the entire game that there weren't loud noises, images on the screen, somebody talking, somebody telling us about this or about that, something happening even during a timeout. The teams come to the side and we have the dancers come out, you know, we have the mascot go out and do tricks, and you know, you cannot rest for 1 second. And you know, there's always something that will be filling your eyes and filling your ears. And that's the extreme case of commercialization, where it's a total entertainment experience. And I was surprised at the Americana, you know, when there was a break in the action, we didn't have any dancers. No cheerleaders. It was a problem for me. And you know, in the U.S. stadiums, they will have the LED lights all the way around the stadium, and then they'll have when there's a timeout, there'll be a Coca-Cola horse and another horse, not from different companies. They would have horses that represent things that fans are interested in. And they would say, do you think horse number 1 is going to win, number 2, or number 3? And then they start this little electronic race. It's like a little video game. And it goes around the whole stadium. And the people who picked number 1, if number 1 horse is the winner, they all feel good. You know, I don't know why, but you know, this is just to keep their attention while the teams are having a timeout. Okay? So you don't have to talk to your friend, and they certainly don't want you looking at your phone. So they provide a total entertainment experience. But there is resistance to the total entertainment experience. And this is in Croatia. I mean, the ultras in Croatia and many other countries in Europe now, the ultras consist primarily of younger fans who have been fans from birth, you know, of their local club. And, you know, they form their own organizations. Their identities are wrapped up, you know, with these clubs. And they felt in the past that they had some control. You know, that the owners, that the club leaders listened to them. And the fans felt they identified with the team because they felt that they were engaged with management, even if it was at a relatively token level. But now, with modern commercialized football, they feel disrespected. They no longer feel that they're being meaningfully engaged. And they feel left out. And they resent this because they're the core fans. They're the ones that show up when it's raining, you know, when the club doesn't have a good record and they're losing. You know, we're the ones that are always there. And now, you're changing things to attract tourists. You know, and you're forgetting about us. So we are going to wage a war against modern football. And we don't like Euro. We don't like FIFA. We don't like UEFA. We don't like these corrupt officials who are using the game for their own commercial purposes and forgetting about the true fans. So when you see the TIFO exhibits in some of the games with the flares going off, you know, those are people who have been able to very creatively sneak flares in. You know, they do it in all sorts of ways. But and when that flare goes off, that's a symbol. And the symbol is that we are against modern football and how it's being operated, the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, the focus on commercialization, I'll give you the list. Oh, and they say, by the way, we're not going to lose this war. All right? And some of the ultras they all say that they're not political, but many of their messages are political. And some of them are left-wing, and some of them are right-wing. I think a few more are right-wing. They don't like U.S. owners, for example, coming into Europe and into their country. They don't like owners from Qatar and from Kuwait and Saudi Arabia coming in and buying teams with their billions and billions of oil money. And then doing things that fit the interests of profit, not the interests of the club. So they object. Okay, so dear UEFA, you'll never stop us. All right? So They say the players are becoming mercenary, they're overpaid, there's high ticket prices, the clubs are changing names in some cases so that they will be more marketable. And this is the name that's existed for 100 years for some of these clubs. The clubs are moving the stadium from one place to another place in the city or another town. There's a new sterile atmosphere at the renovated stadium. There's a commodification of fan culture, and there's a focus on attracting new fans instead of keeping the old fans. And so those are the objections that are being voiced by supporters around the world. And does that happen in Brazil? Is there a component of a war against modern football in Brazil? Not that much? So, wait. So, there may be, because their goal, not all of their goals, but when you stop and look at the ultras who sit down and have a serious conversation, the ultras, ultimately, this is what they want. They want more transparent and accountable management. They want to reform football management generally at the top levels, and they want more engagement with the club, with them as club supporters. Because now the emphasis is on sponsors, not supporters. Because the sponsors and the media are the source of most of the money, not spectators. So, the biggest commercial sports could survive if they did not sell one ticket. The NFL teams could make money if they did not sell one ticket. Any NFL, because they get $5 billion a year from the media companies, and they get money from sponsors. They get profits from selling everything that they can possibly put a logo on, and so they make money in all of those different ways. They don't need spectators anymore. Now, spectators are nice because they increase profits and so on. So, they're concerned about them, but some spectators in Europe, not in the United States, object to the fact that they're not seen as being as worthwhile as they were in the past. So there are people in England, for example, who have organized so that they can buy teams. So that's one way to feel more engaged, is you just buy the team. And that can happen when teams are owned by stockholders. So there are some people who are working with big financiers who are trying to get enough money so that the fans can buy their teams and take more control of them. But in the meantime, sport is moving in this direction. Okay? So professional wrestling is an example of the extreme case. If you take all of the components of commercial sport and you push them to the extreme, this is what you would get. And the outcomes are all predetermined. They know who's going to win beforehand. But the main thing is entertaining the audience and making sure the audience is consumers. So we already talked about MMA like that. And this is the other important part of one last point, a couple last points. There's a change in the locus of control in commercial sports. And players, athletes in the past have objected to this. Some of them still have problems. But what happens is the control shifts away from the athletes. And decisions about the game are less likely to reflect the interests of the athletes and more likely to reflect the interests of the sponsors and the media companies. And that's when the games are scheduled. Sometimes you get crazy schedules. Games start at 11 o'clock at night so people in different time zones can watch, and the control shifts towards the owners, the sponsors, the advertisers, the media personnel, the marketing and publicity programs, the professional management staff, the accountants, the agents, and the players are kind of left behind. And, but why did the athletes accept this change in the locus of control? It has brought the top ones more money. Big money. Money that just 10 years ago you couldn't even dream about. So, you know, Lionel Messi, I think last year made over $80 million. And now we have Tiger Woods and some Formula One drivers and some others who are billion-dollar athletes. So they don't care if there's, you know, if there's more sponsorship and if they have to do appearances to the sponsors logo on and everything, because they're making $80 million. So but what's happened is that there's a greater and greater gap between the highly paid players and the low paid players, between the high wealthy teams and the low wealthy teams. So what's happening in commercial sports today is growing inequality. And eventually that means that there will be fewer teams, fewer choices for people in terms of being fans and watching matches. But every match will be televised, and you will be able to see highlights during the whole day, and replayed all night on ESPN 3 or 8 or whatever. So basically, the control is shifted away from athletes, but at the same time that some athletes are making more money, there's a bigger inequality gap. And as Pierre Bourdieu has said, that back in, maybe 1978, or maybe in the early 1980s, he said, like it or not, the public interest will never emerge from the vision of those who have appropriated sports as a tool of capital and capitalist expansion. So eventually, people will lose out with commercialized sports. So that's an interesting prediction by somebody who is highly respected. So that's about all we have time for today. We'll talk about the media tomorrow and things related to politics and sports. I will talk a little bit about some of the work that Dora and I have done about legacy related to mega sport events. And if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about social change and sport. But I think for you, the legacy issues would be some of the more interesting, unless Dora's already talked about them okay. So we'll talk about those, and you can see what might happen in connection with the Olympic Games. So I'll see you tomorrow. So thank you.